Welcome to the ParaNet Continuum, a weekly program dealing with extraordinary claims of the paranormal on Earth and beyond. Whether or not you believe in the paranormal, the controversies are real, and this program will try to get to the bottom of it. Your host is Michael Corbin, Director of ParaNet Information Services, a global communications network based near Denver, Colorado, dedicated to the investigation of parapsychology, futuristic science, and the UFO enigma. We invite you to keep an open mind as we discuss some of the most fascinating and strange subjects around. Now here's your host, Michael Corbin.
And good evening. Tonight we've got a lot of things to talk about. I guess it doesn't get any better than this, of course. Tonight's guest is Kevin Randle. He's going to update us on what's going on with the Roswell investigation. We're very excited about this because we're now broadcasting across America. We're coming to you live from Poor Joe's Coffee House and Espresso Bar, located in the beautiful Golden Triangle in downtown Denver at 970 Lincoln Street. What's even more exciting about this is that we will have a live audience as time goes. We're going to be installing a window between the studio and the coffee house, and we'll be taking questions from our audience as well as your questions from our call-in toll-free telephone number. So coffee and talk radio, I guess it's a winning combination. Now, one thing I want to mention is that in appreciation for KHOW bringing this program to our Denver audience, next week during the show from 7 o'clock to 8 o'clock p.m. Mountain Time, we're going to offer a 63-cent cup of coffee. If you want to come in and listen to the program as it's aired, you're welcome to. Again, that's at Poor Joe's Coffee House. It's at 970 Lincoln in Denver. And also, next Thursday evening will be the MyCap meeting, our regularly scheduled meetings the second Thursday of the month. Those meetings are also held at Poor Joe's Coffee House, and that'll be at 7:30 p.m. next Thursday night. Now, if you want more information on this, you can call our toll-free number. It's 800-836-6381. That's 1-800-836-NET1. And that'll get you the information you can call during the week. And again, that's our number for other things too. Also, we're now we're actually growing up. I mean, it's really, as we head into the 21st century, we're now able to take Visa and MasterCard for your purchases. And speaking of purchases, you can now subscribe to Continuum magazine with your credit card. I highly recommend this quarterly publication. And you can get this now with your credit card. It's $18 a year. It's a quarterly magazine. And of course, we have a lot of real good information in it. We have basically a featured article each month by someone out in the field, and we also feature an article by Dr. Greg Wheeler, who is MyCap's Director of Investigations. Greg, as you know, probably you've heard him on the program a couple of times, is a clinical psychologist in California, and Greg is writing a lot on the state of ufology today, and some of the ideas that he's putting forward are very interesting. We're getting a lot of good feedback from that. And we also are taking Visa and MasterCard. Also, if you have a computer and a modem, you can now go to our webpage and buy ParaNet products and services. If you have your computer modem and an internet service provider, you can reach us at http://www.paranet.org/paranet. And you can go there and you can see what we've got on the webpage. It's pretty an interesting webpage. We've got some interesting links to other areas as well. And also, thanks to our affiliate in Salt Lake City, KCNR, you can now hear this program live on the internet using Real Audio. And AudioNet, which is a company out there in the ethereal computer land that is now putting our program live so people around the world can hear it. It's amazing, this technology. And of course, like I said, we're broadcasting live from a coffee shop here in the Denver area. It's really great. My guest tonight is a well-known author and researcher who's brought a considerable focus on what may be the event of the century, the crash of an alien spacecraft in the deserts of New Mexico in 1947. He's written several books on the subject of the Roswell crash with co-author Don Schmidt. He's lectured widely and made several television appearances, not to mention his work on the Showtime movie about Roswell. He's also an old-time Denver guy from years ago. It's my pleasure to welcome to the program tonight Kevin Randle. Good evening, Kevin.
Good evening.
Thanks for being on the program.
Glad to do it.
Listen, before we get started, I know you've written a couple of books. We're going to get to that in a minute. But what, for our audience, some of those who may not know what happened in 1947, give us a brief overview.
Can't do it.
Why?
There's just
not
too
enough
much
time?
information to do it quickly.
Okay.
No, seriously, what happened basically is an alien spacecraft crashed near Roswell, New Mexico in July of 1947. The government moved in. The government secured the areas, recovered the craft, recovered the bodies, moved everything off to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base in Dayton, Ohio. That's a real a thumbnail sketch of the situation.
Now, a lot of people there's a considerable amount of controversy. Now we're starting to see a lot of stuff coming up. For example, the Air Force, the Air Force making the recovery of the thing a crashed balloon or something.
Well, it's nothing new. Let's go back to 1947. The Air Force came out and said that what crashed near Roswell, New Mexico was nothing more spectacular than a common weather balloon and a ray wind target. Now we jump forward to 1994, and the Air Force says, what crashed near Roswell really wasn't a balloon. We lied about that in 1947, but what crashed there was a balloon. All they did was give it a different name. Same thing, say weather balloon, ray wind targets. Absolutely no documentable evidence that this is what they found, but the people just jumped on it. Yeah, it was a balloon. It was a Mogul balloon. Their suggestion is that Project Mogul was somehow... Project Mogul itself was, in fact, very highly classified, but the equipment was not classified. There was nothing there that the a rancher, the intelligence officer of the 509th Bomb Group, couldn't identify. And yet we're supposed to believe that they couldn't recognize a common balloon and a ray wind target. Nothing spectacular. So I think it's interesting that the Air Force claims that they have no interest in UFOs, and yet they spent all this money in this effort to refute what a bunch of UFO nuts believe. Why do they care that we believe a flying saucer crashed near Roswell, New Mexico, unless there's something to it?
I think that's a very good conclusion to draw from that. Now, there were bodies recovered, according to the witnesses. How many witnesses have you talked to over the years?
I think that if we count the witnesses, I probably talked to 500 people who had some sort of involvement. And this is everything from first-hand witnesses who saw the craft and the bodies, who participated in the recovery operation either at the impact site near Roswell or the Brazel Ranch, or family members whom the original witnesses talked to, brothers, fathers, uncles, other sorts of family friends that they've talked to. I think the total number is probably around 500, and we probably conducted between 2,500 and 3,000 interviews.
Okay, hold that thought. We're going to get more into the particulars of this interesting case when we come back from our break. And I want to remind everybody tonight that because we have moved our studios, the phone lines are not installed yet, so we won't be able to take your calls tonight. However, if you do want to spend the dime, you can phone in your questions at 303-863-9611. That's 303-863-9611. Someone will take your question and pass it in here to me. Next week, we will have our lines and we'll be able to take your calls. I'm Michael Corbin, and you're listening to the ParaNet Continuum. We'll be right back.
It's been said that the pen is mightier than the sword. With ParaNet, the computer and modem is mightier than the pen. ParaNet is the world's foremost electronic authority on UFOs and the paranormal. ParaNet gives you rapid access to UFO researchers and others like you who want to know what's going on. You'll find stimulating discussions with an interactive link to the world through the Internet's information superhighway. There's a variety of departments dealing with paranormal activities, parapsychology, alien abduction research, conspiracy theories and government cover-ups, and cutting-edge science. There's even a skeptics conference. ParaNet also has the world's most comprehensive database of news articles, sighting reports, and much more available for a small fee. So plug into power and knowledge with ParaNet. Call the data line at 303-863-0469. That's 303-863-0469. Or for more information, contact ParaNet at 303-863-0484.
Learn more about UFOs and the paranormal with the ParaNet catalog. ParaNet, the world's foremost network of the paranormal, has a new catalog for 1996 with an updated list of previous ParaNet Continuum radio shows, available on cassette for $8 each, 2 for $6, or 3 or more for $5 each. You can also order ParaNet's famous black T-shirt with its stunning design of galaxies, stars, and comets, the logos for ParaNet and our sister group MyCap, and a beautiful blue, green, and white planet Earth. There's a complete Alien Grays T-shirt catalog, information on ParaNet's website and computer networks, and on how to subscribe to Continuum, ParaNet's official quarterly magazine. To get your catalog or to order, call 1-800-UFO-NET-1. That's 1-800-UFO-6381. ParaNet, your window on the paranormal, at 1-800-UFO-6381. Looking for good conversation? How about a steaming hot cup of cappuccino to go with that? Poor Joe's Coffee House and Espresso Bar, located at 970 Lincoln, is just the place to get it. Poor Joe's features some of the tastiest treats to go along with your espresso, cappuccino, or latte. Try their mud pie, a simply sinful gourmet dessert with rich mocha and vanilla ice cream and ambrosia chocolate. Or their Josh and John's ice cream. They also feature pastries, muffins, and croissants from Denver's Blue Point Bakery. Ooh, so good. Or if you're hungry for something more, get a stuffed ham and cheese croissant with a hint of Dijon mustard. Now, if you go to Poor Joe's and tell them you heard about the Poor Joe's Coffee House on this show, the ParaNet Continuum on KHOW, Poor Joe's gives you a free espresso drink and a Danish or croissant. That's right, a free espresso drink and pastry if you mention hearing about Poor Joe's on the ParaNet Continuum. That's Poor Joe's at 970 Lincoln in Denver. Open 4 p.m. to 1 a.m. every day.
KHOW.
Paranormal and the growing UFO phenomena by fax, computer network, and this program, the ParaNet Continuum. Here's your host, Michael Corbin.
And once again, returning from Iowa is Kevin Randle, and we're talking about the Roswell crash of 1947. And if you want to call in again, if you would like to ask a question of Kevin, you can reach us at 303-863-9611. Again, that's 303-863-9611. That's just this week, of course. Next week, we'll have our phone lines installed, and we'll be able to take your questions on our 800 number. Kevin, now, what makes the Roswell event? I realize that if we have a true crash of an alien spacecraft, of course, it's going to be the event of the century or the millennia. But what has convinced you, aside from the investigation, what are the points that convinced you that this is really what's going on?
I think the best way to answer that question is to point out what convinced me was the witness testimony. I went to Roswell fully expecting to be able to solve the case in a week. And I think that's what some of the people who claim to have solved it have done. And while we looked at it for 3 days, we decided it was a mogul balloon. But what convinced me was sitting in the living room, sitting in the dining rooms with the various people who were involved in this thing. And that's everybody from Edwin Easley, the Provost Marshal of the 509th Bomb Group, right on down through the long listing of personnel who were involved, telling me that this was an extraterrestrial spacecraft.
Now, some of these people you're talking to are actual first-hand eyewitnesses.
Absolutely. Easley was the Provost Marshal. It was his job to cordon the area. It was his job to keep the civilians out of the area. And I think there's absolutely no doubt that Easley saw it all. Easley told me that it was extraterrestrial. That, to me, was very convincing testimony. Why would Edwin Easley, a retired colonel in the Air Force, or from the Air Force, want to lie to me about this event? If there was nothing to it, why didn't he just say there was nothing to it?
And of course, he's not the only eyewitness that you've talked to.
No, not by any means. What is important about Edwin Easley, here's the Provost Marshal, here's the man who was right there at the top of what would be considered the Roswell police force, the military police force, and here's a man who told me it was extraterrestrial. He told me he was sworn to secrecy. He couldn't talk about it. Now, what kind of a balloon project would you have in 1947 that in 1990 the man involved in it would say, well, it was still secret, it was still classified? What sort of research were we doing in 1947 that has not been made obsolete by further research done in the next 40 years?
Now let's talk about strategy, since we're talking about the whole thing of a cover-up. What were they thinking? In other words, I know that there was a press release that was issued in 1947, and they then turned around and they said at the press release that they had recovered a crashed disc. Then, short time later, they had Jesse Marcel fly down to Texas and say that it was a weather balloon. What happened beyond that? In other words, what's taken place here?
Well, first of all, Jesse Marcel didn't fly to Texas to say it was a weather balloon. Jesse Marcel was put on an airplane with some of the real debris and flown to Fort Worth to have it shown to the 8th Air Force commanding officer, Brigadier General Roger Ramey. It was Ramey who said that it was a weather balloon, and that's where the cover story began. But what we have been told by a couple of the people involved in this thing is that the information was beginning to leak into the public about the event. There was discussions from the sheriff's office. There was a number of civilians involved. So they released the story they had a flying saucer, that they'd recovered a flying saucer, and within a matter of hours they said, no, we made a mistake. Aren't we stupid? It was a weather balloon. And by pushing that story, they were able to cover up the thing much better than denying that anything had happened. It was a brilliant move on the part of somebody.
Now, I know over the years and recently, correct me if I'm wrong, about a year ago, I think you have published another book on specifically crashes of UFOs. I take it that this Roswell event was not the only crash.
Yeah, I did a book called The History of UFO Crashes, and it's a paperback, and they can go out and buy it, and I would love for people to do so. But what we were looking at is there's been rumors of UFO crashes from 1947 on. Actually, there were rumors of crashes prior to that. I think the first crash of an alien spacecraft was reported in I can't remember if it was 1883 or 1886.
Was that the one in Texas?
No. This was 12 years earlier, and it's from Nebraska. And it was another hoax, is the best way of pointing it out. And then we've got a number of crashes of the great airship of 1897. It crashed in Waterloo, Iowa. It crashed in Aurora, Texas. It blew up in near San Angelo, Texas, for example, all in April of 1897.
Now, when you say a hoax, the first one, are you convinced it was a hoax, or are you saying that even that was part of a cover-up?
No, it was a hoax.
It was a hoax.
It was a hoax.
Okay.
We have to look at that. There are people out there who perpetrate hoaxes. There are practical jokers out there who do those sorts of things. They're not part of a cover-up. And we've got to look at it. The Aurora, Texas hoax, for example, from April of 1897, apparently the stringer for the Dallas Morning News, and I forget his name, was from the Aurora, Texas, Wise County, Texas area. And because of the railroad bypassing Aurora, the town was dying. And so he created the story of a crash of an alien spacecraft in Aurora, Texas, to kind of revitalize the town. And, of course, it didn't work back in 1897. It wasn't until the 1960s when we began looking for airship stories that we discovered or rediscovered that story. But there's no doubt in my mind that that was a hoax. The great calf napping from Leroy, Kansas in 1897, that turns out to be a hoax. I think just Jerome Clark did a marvelous piece of detective work discovering that.
Okay. Now, in the 20th century, I know we have the July 47 incident. Wasn't there rumored to be something in the 50s or early 50s that happened?
Well, if we take a look at it, we've got crashes of the airship, or not the airship, but the ghost rockets from Sweden or Scandinavia in the 1946 time frame. We've got a number of rumored crashes from the desert Southwest in 1948 and 49. Those were the Scully hoaxes, or actually we should say the Silas Newton hoaxes.
Right.
We have a number of crashes in the 1950s. I think one that may have some authenticity was Kingman, Arizona in May of 1953. There is some corroborative testimony that has been found that suggests some event near Kingman in 1953. If we skip through to the 60s, again, more crashes that are obviously hoaxes, but we've got a couple of stories that are interesting. Kecksburg, Pennsylvania in December of 1965. It probably was a spacecraft. It may not have been extraterrestrail. There's some good evidence surfacing that suggests it may have been a Soviet craft.
Like a satellite?
A Soviet satellite, yes. There's some evidence that's circulating that suggests that might be the proper explanation. We've got the Las Vegas crash of April of 1962, and there's all kinds of eyewitness testimony that I've been able to talk or uncover, you might say, from Utah, Nevada, talking about this thing that was seen to flash overhead. It killed the engine of a truck. It dimmed lights in a couple of towns. It landed. It took off, and it was seen to explode in the sky east of Las Vegas, Nevada, and that was tracked on radar from Nellis Air Force Base. Jet fighters were scrambled after this thing from both Nellis and Luke near Phoenix. So we've got a good body of testimony about that case. But there's a whole raft of hoaxes. If we go back to July of 47, there's probably stories of 4 or 5 different crashes other than Roswell, and those are all hoaxes. One crashed supposedly near Bozeman, Montana. There was one in Shreveport, Louisiana. There was one in, was it Black Rivers Falls, Wisconsin?
Do you think any of those were done or perpetrated by whoever to maybe run interference for the actual crash in Roswell?
No, I think if you take a look at the newspaper clippings of the time and you see what's going on in the time frame, I think that those were just people having a good time.
Okay. Hold that thought, Kevin. We'll get back to that in just a moment on the other side of the break. We continue on the ParaNet Continuum. I'm Michael Corbin. Stay tuned. We'll be right back. My guest is Kevin Randle.
There are many magazines about UFOs. Continuum is different. Continuum is the official quarterly publication of ParaNet and MyCap, and is the outgrowth of ParaNet's worldwide communications network on paranormal phenomena. It's in-depth, challenging, and above all, fascinating. It takes a straight-ahead, no-nonsense look at UFOs, worldwide sighting reports, parapsychology, abduction phenomena, futuristic science, and much, much more. You can get Continuum for just $18 a year. Continuum is also available by fax for a small additional fee. Be informed. Call now and subscribe to Continuum. Call 1-800-UFO-NET-1. That's 1-800-836-6381. Continuum, published by ParaNet Information Services and MyCap. Order yours today at 1-800-UFO-NET-1. Continuum, one of the most fascinating magazines you'll ever read.
This is an invitation for investors to get personally involved in ParaNet. ParaNet is more than just this radio show. ParaNet Information Services Incorporated is dedicated to exploration of the UFO enigma and other paranormal phenomena. ParaNet also publishes Continuum magazine and operates online UFO and paranormal computer services. If you're a qualified investor who shares our enthusiasm, give us a call. Contact Brian Wood at 970-635-2494. That's Brian Wood at 970-635-2494.
Who was the hero of your childhood? Was it President Kennedy or Martin Luther King? Or was it some teacher who changed your life? Teachers have the power to wake up young minds, to be heroes, to change lives. America needs some heroes. If you want to shape our future, call 1-800-45-TEACH. Be a teacher. Be a hero. Call 1-800-45-TEACH.
A public service message brought to you by Recruiting New Teachers and the Ad Council.
Hi, this is Michael Corbin, host of the ParaNet Continuum radio program. I want to tell you about a well-kept secret. It's the Metropolis Cafe, located at Colfax and Logan in Denver, featuring some of the best Greek cuisine anywhere around. With several traditional Greek dishes on their menu like souvlaki, pasticcio, and gyros, you can't beat the food, the atmosphere, or the down-home Greek old country feel. They also serve American and Mexican dishes, and best of all is their prices. They feature daily breakfast and lunch specials that will please your pocketbook and your palate. A locally owned and operated restaurant and bar. So, come on in. Enjoy the outdoor patio dining and relax. I'll see you there. That's the Metropolis Cafe, located at Colfax and Logan, right next to the Basilica. The Metropolis Cafe, Denver's best undiscovered Greek restaurant at 341 East Colfax Avenue in Denver.
KHOW.
you're listening to one of the most unusual programs you'll ever hear. It's the ParaNet Continuum, and it deals with some of the most fascinating mysteries around. Once again, here's your host, the Director of ParaNet Information Services, Michael Corbin.
And once again, if you want to phone in your questions for my guest tonight, Kevin Randle, you can call us at 303-863-9611. That's 303-863-9611. And next week we'll have our lines installed, our toll-free lines, and then we'll be able to take questions again. Also, I want to mention, too, starting next week, in conjunction with our feed now going into the Internet on Real Audio, we're going to have I guess you could call it an internet relay chat, an IRC channel set up on the Internet to where people out there who are outside of the United States who cannot use our 800 number can fire their questions for our guests as they're listening to the program via Real Audio. So that'll be next week, and I'll give you the particulars on the next program. Kevin, I want to go back to a little bit of the strategy and the mindset of, I don't want to say an MJ-12-like group, but they're apparently, if we're talking about a cover-up of this magnitude, we're talking about, some kind of group that is running interference for this stuff. And I'm wondering how much of this stuff we see today, for example, the alien autopsy film and a lot of this stuff that's coming up with the Air Force. What is the reason for that? Is it to throw interest away from the truth, or what are they trying to do?
Well, if you're talking about the alien autopsy film, I think that was designed by specific individuals to make them money and has nothing to do with the government.
You think it was bogus?
I think there's no doubt in my mind it was bogus. I think that Santilli and the people involved in it did it specifically to make money because they realized that the interest that was being generated by the Roswell case. Look at the books that were out, and they were selling well. The Roswell film on Showtime was very well received. How many television programs, Unsolved Mysteries, 48 Hours, and on and on and on, had done segments on Roswell? So I think somebody watching this says, well, the one thing that's missing is photographs or movies of this being, and if we can come up with something, we might be able to make some dough on it.
So you don't see any kind of a directed intelligence...
Not behind the alien autopsy film. I think that was just a commercial venture done by hoaxers for the purpose of making dough. But let's take another look at some of this other stuff. What is the motivation of the Air Force to reinvestigate the Roswell case in the way they did? They talked to 5 people. Sheridan Cavett, who was the counterintelligence officer at Roswell in 1947. They talked to 3 people who were involved with Project Mogul, and they determined that there was nothing to this case. And the question that I have to ask is, they quoted a number of documents that are part of various Roswell packages, including one that was done by the Fund for UFO Research. And in those packages was testimony from Brigadier General Arthur Exon, who talked about flying over the 2 distinct sites. There was a transcript of my first interview with Edwin Easley, which suggests something very unusual happened there, yet the Air Force didn't mention that. They ignored that sort of information. And I think that if you're looking at that, then you've got something else going on there. And we've just received a copy of the letter that Colonel Weaver, who was the chief Air Force investigator on this, carried out to Sheridan Cavett, absolving him of his oath that he probably took in 1947, or allegedly took in 1947. And if you read the letter carefully, what it says is he is free to discuss this with Colonel Weaver, that Colonel Weaver has the proper clearances. The question is, if Cavett got was sworn to secrecy by a higher level than the Secretary of the Air Force, which of course would be the Secretary of Defense or the President, he may not have seen that as sufficient to allow him to speak. But let's say that it did. There is nothing in the interview that Weaver conducted with Cavett that would suggest that they discussed anything that was highly classified. So what we don't know is what the discussions were prior to Weaver turning on the tape recorder.
So, again, there's no way to find that out either.
There's no way to find that out unless Weaver will spill his guts, and I don't think he will because he's looking to make general, and I certainly don't blame him. If I was in his position, I'd be looking to make general as well. You can't blame him. You can't blame Cavett. But what's happening is we're being manipulated to think that everything is honest and open and above board. And yet when we go back to Cavett's testimony, he originally told me personally that he had not been at Roswell.
Let me ask you this. Do you really think, and not to deny that the reality of what these witnesses are saying, but simply to maybe put things in perspective, do you really believe that the Air Force has possession of this material, or would it be more logical to assume that because the Air Force might not be equipped to handle this, that it was passed to, say, the military-industrial complex, and when the Air Force says, we have nothing, they really are telling the truth?
In 1947, we've got to, again, take another history lesson. In July of 1947, the Air Force was in a state of flux. It was part of the United States Army.
They were organizing the forces, right?
If you will, you've got to understand two things that are invisible: electricity and magnetism. And if you know how to do that, and which we all do, of course, very easily, you plug into the VCR and poof, you've got a movie. But you've got to understand these things. You've got printed circuit boards that made of plastic that look sort of like glass, but they don't shatter the way glass do. They're much more flexible. And I think what we're looking at is a technology that is so much further advanced beyond where we are than the VCR and the TV would be beyond where medieval England is. I'm not sure that they've actually figured much of this thing out.
Okay. All right, we got to go to another break. When we come back, I want to get into the more insidious side of some of the threats that have been made against some of the witnesses like Frankie Rowe. And we're going to talk, too, we're going to get an opinion from Kevin about the piece that was turned over to the Roswell Museum in New Mexico. So stay tuned. Kevin Randle is my guest. We're talking about the 1947 crash of an alien spacecraft in Roswell, New Mexico. Stay tuned. I'm Michael Corbin, and you're listening to the ParaNet Continuum. We'll be right back.
KHOW.
It's been said that the pen is mightier than the sword. With ParaNet, the computer and modem is mightier than the pen. ParaNet is the world's foremost electronic authority on UFOs and the paranormal. ParaNet gives you rapid access to UFO researchers and others like you who want to know what's going on. You'll find stimulating discussions with an interactive link to the world through the Internet's information superhighway. There's a variety of departments dealing with paranormal activities, parapsychology, alien abduction research, conspiracy theories and government cover-ups, and cutting-edge science. There's even a skeptics conference. ParaNet also has the world's most comprehensive database of news articles, sighting reports, and much more available for a small fee. So plug into power and knowledge with ParaNet. Call the data line at 303-863-0469. That's 303-863-0469. Or for more information, contact ParaNet at 303-863-0484.
Grab a pen and get ready to copy down a computer address. It's an email address where you can reach the ParaNet Information Services BBS through America Online. With America Online's Internet Gateway, you can send us mail and we can respond to you personally through your America Online screen name. With America Online's Usenet Newsgroup tie-in, you can also access the 7 ParaNet newsgroups dealing with UFOs, metaphysics, paranormal activity, and others. Learn about our upcoming shows and pose questions in advance. And if your question is selected, you'll get a free cassette copy of the show. You'll also find summaries of past shows. If you're not already a customer of America Online, call 1-800-827-6364 for more information. Now, here's that email address to reach us. It's paranet@aol.com or paranet@paranet.org. America Online and ParaNet, a winning combination.
Looking for good conversation? How about a steaming hot cup of cappuccino to go with that? Poor Joe's Coffee House and Espresso Bar, located at 970 Lincoln, is just the place to get it. Poor Joe's features some of the tastiest treats to go along with your espresso, cappuccino, or latte. Try their mud pie, a simply sinful gourmet dessert with rich mocha and vanilla ice cream and ambrosia chocolate. Or their Josh and John's ice cream. They also feature pastries, muffins, and croissants from Denver's Blue Point Bakery. Ooh, so good. Or if you're hungry for something more, get a stuffed ham and cheese croissant with a hint of Dijon mustard. Now, if you go to Poor Joe's and tell them you heard about the Poor Joe's Coffee House on this show, the ParaNet Continuum on KHOW, Poor Joe's gives you a free espresso drink and a Danish or croissant. That's right, a free espresso drink and pastry if you mention hearing about Poor Joe's on the ParaNet Continuum. That's Poor Joe's at 970 Lincoln in Denver. Open 4 p.m. to 1 a.m. every day.
KHOW.
When it comes to UFOs, it's important to keep an open mind, but not as open as, say, a refuse can. We separate the facts from the garbage on the ParaNet Continuum. Once again, here's your host, Michael Corbin.
Joining me once again is Kevin Randle. We're talking about the 1947 crash of an alien spacecraft in Roswell, New Mexico. Kevin, now, how many people have you talked to that have had threats like Frankie Rowe?
There were a number of them, and we've got to kind of, again, separate things out. I spoke to a number of archaeologists who suggested that they were threatened not with being killed, but with professional suicide, if you will. If they went out and talked about it, they'd be committing professional suicide. Their careers would be ruined. We've talked to a number of military personnel who were sworn to secrecy. We've talked to a number of civilians who were told that if they... the person that comes to mind is Judd Roberts, who was a minority station owner of KGFL radio in Roswell in July of 1947, told that if they broadcast their interview with Brazel, they had best look for new jobs because they'd be out of the radio business the next day, that the FCC would pull their license. And then we talked to a number of people such as Frankie Rowe, Glenn Dennis, and a couple of others who suggested that if they spoke out of turn, they would be killed. That includes the Sheriff Wilcox and his family as well. So we talked to a number of people who were threatened with death if they talked about this.
Have you guys ever, you or Don, in your investigation, have you ever met with any kind of stuff similar to that at all?
Not at all. And that's kind of an interesting point. The worst that I ever happened to me was I was talking to one of the witnesses on the telephone, and the conversation started coming back to us. And I said to him, "Are you recording the conversation?" And he said no, and neither was I, so we terminated it at that point. Now, I don't know whether that was some kind of cross lines or something like that, or somebody was monitoring the conversation, was letting us know that they were monitoring the conversation. But that's the only sort of thing that ever happened. And I've often thought I'd be very easy to silence being an officer in the Air Force Reserve. All they've got to do is call me to active duty, say, "Yeah, it's all true, and it's classified top secret. You can't talk about it."
And you'd be finished.
I'd be all done.
Yeah. Well, you know, the thing is, when we're talking about this, what has been discovered now since the publication of your last book concerning the Roswell investigation? What new information has come out?
Well, what we have found is sort of corroboration of various aspects of what we talked about in the book. One of the things that was discovered by Don Etker and John Price of the UFO Enigma Museum was another eyewitness to the craft and the bodies named Thomas Gonzalez. Now, when the hardback edition of the book came out, we didn't have much information on that, so when the paperback came out, we could add some information that way. And what we found since that time is corroborations of various aspects of the story, so that we're fine-tuning it. I mean, everything, it seems to me that everything is out there, and all that has happened is a look at corroborative testimonies for some of this stuff. One of the MP officers has been discovered and talked about what Edwin Easley told him briefly, sent him out to see the site. There was nothing particularly interesting when he got there because it was all pretty well cleaned up, but he ran into the military cordon, which of course the Air Force says, well, there was no military cordon. Well, we found another military witness who said that he ran into the cordon. So what we found are things like that, just kind of fine-tuning the event.
What about this metal fragment that was turned into the Roswell Museum? A couple of weeks ago, we had Walter Hott on the program, and he told us a little bit about the fragment that was turned into them. What do you know about that?
Basically what Walter Hott has told probably you and everybody else, and I've talked to a number of people have kept me advised of what's going on. They're continuing testing going on of the fragment. I suspect it is probably something of terrestrial manufacture that got into the hands, because we're talking at this point to a friend of a friend of a friend. We don't have we do have the name of the guy who supposedly picked it up, but he is not in the Roswell yearbook. So now what they're doing is looking at the records from St. Louis to see if we can determine whether or not he was in fact signed to Roswell. That's what's really key at this point, because we have got to establish his credentials to make the metal or tie the metal to that site. And at that point, we cannot. At this point, we can't do that, but it may come in the future. So what we've got to do, of course, is remain skeptical, say it's very interesting, and investigate it. We don't have any solid conclusions yet.
Now, going back to the 40s and the 50s, I had an interesting conversation with Al Chop it's been a couple of months ago now. We talked about the mindset of the Pentagon in the early 50s when they had the Washington overflight. And Al said on the air that the mindset of the Joint Chiefs and several of the military personnel at the time was that they were dealing with an extraterrestrial threat. My question is, and I comment on this if you will, what do you think the downside is to the cover-up? In other words, what are they afraid of letting out of the bag, aside from the realization that we might be getting visits from something out there?
Well, I want to take a moment before I answer your question, is to point out I talked to Al Chop and I've talked to Dewey Fournet, who are both in the Air Traffic Control Center at Washington National Airport when the overflights took place in 1952. Mm-hmm. Both of those people told me what they were dealing with was not radar reflections or temperature inversions. They were dealing with alien spacecraft. It was intercepted by fighters, and the fighters... The pilots and the fighters saw the lights that correlated to where the targets were on the radar. And we've been told that there were no sightings by the pilots, that there were no intercepts. We've told all kinds of stories, and what it boils down to is we've got a major case from Washington, D.C. in 1952. I've talked to two of the people who were in the control tower, or not the control tower, but the Air Traffic Control Center. I've talked to other people who saw the damn things. And so we've been fed a crock about the Washington National sightings, and I have a book coming out called Conspiracy of Silence, which has a long chapter dealing with that. But I think the downside, what they're afraid of, is if you go back and you take a look at the history of this thing, that in the early 1960s, they had the Brookings Institution take a look at what would happen if they announced that there had been a confrontation between people of Earth and an alien race. Not necessarily a face-to-face confrontation, but merely a contact through radio astronomy. And of the 15 disciplines contacted, anthropologists, psychologists, theologians, economists, 14 of them said it would be disastrous for our society, because any time a technologically superior society comes in contact with a technologically inferior society, the technologically inferior society ceases to exist. Not necessarily through conquest or warfare, but merely the introduction of the advanced technology radically alters the civilization.
Do you think there's a connection between some of the new stuff that we hear about, say abductions and stuff? Do you think there's a connection to that and this perhaps? Do you think that this is really going on by aliens, the abduction phenomena?
My personal opinion is that the abduction phenomena has been misidentified.
Okay, can you go a little further than that?
I don't really think there's much in the way of abductions going on, and I did some of the early research into abductions and published some of the first articles about them, but by re-examining some of that stuff, I think that we've got to take a look at the cultural perspective, if you will, the folkloric traditions that seem to predict the abduction phenomena and try to understand how that relates to the abduction phenomenon. And it seems to me, from a purely logical standpoint, why abduct people and put them back? If you're interested in genetic research, why not just abduct people and keep them?
Well, a lot of it doesn't make sense anyway, just as much as these mysterious animal deaths. They don't make any sense, but yet, we're hearing a lot of these allegations that they're the work of aliens.
Well, I think that's the problem. We're hearing the allegations, and I think we've got to take a much more skeptical point of view and a much more scientific look at some of this stuff. And I think some of the research that has been done throughout the UFO community has been very, very sloppy, that the conclusions were drawn before the research was conducted, and that we have to take another look at it. And I know that Bud Hopkins, for example, said that there are no traditional sci-fi gods or devils to explain the abduction phenomenon, yet if we go take a look, we find out they are there, that there is a tradition in science fiction that predicts the abduction phenomenon.
Okay.
Which is not to say it's driven by science fiction, but we cannot reject that point out of hand by saying it's not there, because it in fact is.
Okay, Kevin, hold on. We'll get some final thoughts from you when we come back from this break. And again, my guest is Kevin Randle. We're talking about the Roswell 1947 crash. We'll be right back after this break. I'm Michael Corbin, and you're listening to the ParaNet Continuum.
There are many magazines about UFOs. Continuum is different. Continuum is the official quarterly publication of ParaNet and MyCap, and is the outgrowth of ParaNet's worldwide communications network on paranormal phenomena. It's in-depth, challenging, and above all, fascinating. It takes a straight-ahead, no-nonsense look at UFOs, worldwide sighting reports, parapsychology, abduction phenomena, futuristic science, and much, much more. You can get Continuum for just $18 a year. Continuum is also available by fax for a small additional fee. Be informed. Call now and subscribe to Continuum. Call 1-800-UFO-NET-1. That's 1-800-836-6381. Continuum, published by ParaNet Information Services and MyCap. Order yours today at 1-800-UFO-NET-1. Continuum, one of the most fascinating magazines you'll ever read.
Pilots depend on accurate, timely information, both in the cockpit and on the ground. Skyway Publications helps with both. The Skyway Airport Directory and Entertainment Guide provides convenient, accurate information for safe flight and landing operations, as well as local businesses that cater to pilots. These are free, pocket-sized guides with information on large and small airports nationwide, along with technical information, fuel and airport services, and businesses that can make life easier for pilots. Keep in mind, it's free. Check your local airport for the Skyway Publications Airport Directory and Entertainment Guide, or call area 970-669-1800. Call Skyway today and find out how the guide can also be a financial opportunity for you. Skyway Publications, your ticket to safer, cheaper, and more convenient flight. Check your local airport or call Skyway at 970-669-1800.
Hi, this is Michael Corbin, host of the ParaNet Continuum radio program. I want to tell you about a well-kept secret. It's the Metropolis Cafe, located at Colfax and Logan in Denver, featuring some of the best Greek cuisine anywhere around. With several traditional Greek dishes on their menu like souvlaki, pasticcio, and gyros, you can't beat the food, the atmosphere, or the down-home Greek old country feel. They also serve American and Mexican dishes, and best of all is their prices. They feature daily breakfast and lunch specials that will please your pocketbook and your palate. A locally owned and operated restaurant and bar. So, come on in. Enjoy the outdoor patio dining and relax. I'll see you there. That's the Metropolis Cafe, located at Colfax and Logan, right next to the Basilica. The Metropolis Cafe, Denver's best undiscovered Greek restaurant at 341 East Colfax Avenue in Denver.
KHOW.
This is the ParaNet Continuum, a weekly program dedicated to the mysterious and fascinating world of UFOs and the paranormal. If you're interested in learning more about ParaNet, the world's foremost communications normal, call us at 303-863-0484 or write to Box 172, Wheat Ridge, Colorado 80034. Once again, here's your host, Michael Corbin.
And my guest is Kevin Randle. We're talking about the crash of a disc, an alien spacecraft in 1947, Roswell to be more specific. Kevin, we got just a short time to wrap this up. You're right, an hour is not enough time. how can people reach you if they want further information, and also plug your books and what's out there on the market right now?
Oh, the Roswell books are all out there on the market right now. There's a book called A History of UFO Crashes, and I even did a book on buried treasures and lost gold mines, and Colorado is, of course, mentioned in that as well.
That's a wild place here.
I've been there. I remember Colorado. If people want to get in touch with me, I'm at Post Office Box 264, Marion, Iowa, 52302.
Okay, Kevin, thank you very much. I appreciate the time, and
well, thank you.
We'll have you back when we as things go on. I'm sure that this is a very interesting mystery, and enjoyed having you on the program to talk about it.
Well,
Thank you. Next week, please join us for our program, as we will have Dr. Edgar Mitchell, an Apollo 14 astronaut, on the program to talk about his new book, The Way of the Explorer. And of course, Edgar Mitchell's been in the news lately on Dateline talking about a government cover-up about contact with extraterrestrials. So, again, join us next week. Until then, I'm Michael Corbin telling you to keep your eyes on the skies. Good night.
KHOW.
Looking for good conversation? How about a steaming hot cup of cappuccino to go with that? Poor Joe's Coffee